I was 18 at the time, and one day, I decided to go hunting. I had my shotgun and a bag of shells with me. I shot at a few birds and rabbits here and there. I was in the middle of the woods by myself, and I was about to pack it in, when I heard some strange rustling from the bushes. I then caught a glimpse of what I thought was a dogman. It appeared roughly 7 feet tall and had a dog-like face with really long hair. It also had a long tail like that of a wolf. I began to panic and I pointed my gun at the creature. I shot at it, and it let out a high-pitched scream. I then ran as fast as I could. It didn't chase me until I ran back to my truck, though. I got into my truck and started it. Then I drove off. I went home and never told anybody about it. I believe that dogmen are more common than people even realize. I don't know what the dogman wanted, but I'm terrified and I don't think I will go back to those woods hunting ever again. I knew all about dogmen originally because my uncle has had several encounters with them, so I'm familiar with the concept and what they look like. I never thought, though, in a million years I would ever run into one myself. I'm glad that I wrote down my encounter. It's nice to know that I'm not the only person in the world that has ever actually seen one. I mean, hell, before this, I thought I would never see one. But I guess I'm wrong. In 1991, I was lucky enough to be able to take a trip to Europe with my parents. I was very young at this time, but I still remember some of the things that had happened. I was staying in a hotel in London, England, and I was in my own room, lying in bed, looking out the window. The window was open. I wanted to go to sleep, but I kept hearing a sound outside, a sound that kept drawing my attention. It was a sound that was a mix of a squeal and a gurgle. I remember that it was coming from somewhere in the air over the nearby street. So I kept looking out the window to try and find a source, and I see a shadow pass over the street. I looked up to see that it was indeed looked like a gargoyle. It was a little over a few feet tall and appeared to have bat-like wings and almost a black beak-shaped like object on its face. It had a long, spaded tail. It appeared dark, smoky gray in color, and it was flying straight towards me in the window. I remember that it got so close, I could see vivid detail in its face. It had yellow eyes with dark gray, black metal slanted pupils in each eye. It also had dark gray lips and humanistic features. It even had kind of pointed ears like that you would see devils have. It had a mouth that was wide open, revealing several rows of tiny pointed teeth, kind of like how fish have. And it was making this awful squeal as it came towards me flying. Now, this was kind of closer to night, so there wasn't a whole lot of light out, but light enough that the buildings were emanating light that I could see this thing. It was going to fly straight towards the glass and come into my room. I remember that I was extremely frightened. I screamed at the top of my voice. It flew right past the window, dodging us. I remember that it was so close to the glass, I even saw its reflection. I remember that there was a flash of white light behind it as soon as it followed. I remember that it flew right past the window, over the street, over to some other buildings, and finally disappeared. I closed the window so quickly and was so frightened that I cried myself to sleep that night. Of course, my parents were rich, so they had their own room and thought I would benefit at the age of 7 of me having my own. So I was all alone. The next morning, I was still upset and I told my parents about what I had seen, and then I told them that I had seen a gargoyle. They found it very odd and they did not believe me. They kept asking me what I was doing out of bed. I told them that I'd heard the sound and I saw this thing that I thought was a gargoyle. They told me it was probably a dream, but I knew it was not a dream. It was all very real. It happened, and I have never been able to forget. In fact, I'm still afraid of gargoyles. I keep using the term gargoyle because I'm not sure what else to call them. It was some demonic humanoid. That's all I know how to describe it as, and I remember, even at that age, it scared me badly. One night, when I was in the Navy, back in 1982 or 1983, I was on night watch. I was stationed in the Persian Gulf. On that night, I was standing watch as the quartermaster, and I was on the starboard bridge wing, looking at the horizon. There were about 6 of us on watch, and the sky was extremely clear. It was a moonless night. The stars were very bright, and the sea was very calm. Up ahead of us, I saw a very bright light rising up out of the sea. It was not a plane. It was very bright. I could not tell if it was the reflection of the moon or a star, but I was so fascinated by this light that I wanted to see where it was coming from. I kept looking, and I saw the light get bigger, and I could tell it was coming from underneath the water. Some very large object was rising from the water, emanating a very low blue-colored light. It was then that I noticed it was a round object, maybe about 100 or so feet in diameter, and it was rising very slowly out of the sea. It was big, and very dark in the center, like a black shadow. Only the light of the stars reflected on it, and it itself emitted light, if that makes any sense. I watched it rise from the sea for about 10 or 15 minutes as it slowly ascended into the sky. Did I mention how round it was? And it was so large that I could see it, even when I turned my head. I remember that I was so fascinated, I forgot to even call the captain. I only remembered to tell the bridge watch standard to inform the captain when it reached its highest point. I watched it rise up over the horizon. It rose up and then just stopped and disappeared, before hanging out in the air, all the while making a very low humming sound. It was about 100 or so feet up in the sky, out of the sea, before I heard it disappear. I watched for about a few more minutes afterwards, waiting for this thing to appear again in the sky. I was in so much amazement and terrified at the same time, holding on to the platform railing. I could not believe what I was seeing. So I told others, "Guys, you gotta see this." They came out and stood beside me to watch it. All of us had seen it. I mean, it was so big, how could you not have seen it? I mean, none of us missed it. I remember talking to everybody afterwards, and we were all very quiet. Nobody spoke. It was just hanging there in the air. And then suddenly, when it went away, we were all kind of expecting it to return. But instead, it just disappeared. I remember that it was so fast that none of us could even imagine it would have gone. I was also scared to tell the captain, and scared to sleep for about the next week. But when I finally told the captain, he had told me that, well, there were other ships in the area that thought that it was some kind of secret experimental UFO craft. I didn't buy the explanation. We all believed that we saw a UFO. I mean, I don't know what else to call it. I have no idea what it was, but I am positive that it was not a military craft or a plane of any kind. Here's my story. It happened when I was about 4 or 5. I am now 30. I was living in an apartment complex here in St. Louis. I had an apartment facing a playground, so I would always be out there playing. One night, I was sitting out there and it was now getting pretty dark. I was the only kid out there at the time. And I see this creature come out of the woods. It was human-like, but I remember thinking even at that age it was not a human. It had a beak, and it was all black, and kind of slithered in its movements. It was so tall that it easily was able to leap over the fence into the playground. It walked around, away from me, and I just had the feeling it was looking for somebody, or looking for me. I remember thinking I had to run. So, at 4 or 5, you can imagine how terrified I was when I ran inside and woke up my mom. I told her that I had not just seen a monster outside, but that it was coming for me. I don't remember if I told her what it was or not. Maybe I told her it was a goblin. But I do remember that it scared her. She made me go back out there with her. and she told me that there was nothing out there, and that I made her get up for nothing. So I got scolded for making things up. I remember thinking, though, that it was still there, that it was just hiding, waiting for her to leave so it can come looking for me. And I was still terrified. But after that, I stayed out of that playground for quite a while. The creature looked like some strange mix between a carnivorous bird like a vulture and a human, or something. I just remember thinking at 4 or 5 years old how ugly it was, and being at that age, how scared I was. Look, I really don't have an explanation for where it came from or why it exists, but I do believe that this thing is out there still, and there might be more of them. I have to live with this memory now forever, and I am a firm believer in things that are not supposed to exist, but do. I'm a believer because I myself had this experience. In 2000, while driving home from work at Mineral, Idaho, which is about 70 miles southwest of Salt Lake City, I came over the hill just east of Parawuna Pass, going around 10 p.m. at night. Looking south from this point, the road drops suddenly into Bonneville Salt Flats. On the road right below me, there were these 6 humanoids running down the road shoulder to shoulder. They were all very tall and thin, with long black hair and pointed ears. Each appeared to be wearing tattered robes. They moved quickly. Out of freaked curiosity, I began to slow down and watch them to try and get a better look, when I suddenly see one of these things turn and look right at me. And then slowly, all of them very slowly turned and faced me directly. We were still 30 to 50 feet away from each other. Now I'm very creeped out, and so I floored it, made the turn, and never looked back. It was a while before I ever told my son and others about what I saw. And finally, years later, I felt enough courage to share my experience on Facebook. My cousin, who lives 14 miles south of the pass, interviewed her elderly neighbor about werewolves spending time in the area, since they firmly believe that there are werewolf creatures out there. The neighbor said they chased her in the mountains when she was young, killed her friend, stole her family's animals, but never admitted it to the police because the dog befriended one of these creatures who ran off. She said most farmers around there had a greyhound because these creatures were always stalking and looking for more prey. But apparently, these greyhound dogs would keep these creatures at bay. You could still hear them howling some nights. Well, about 30 years prior, while on an evening deer run, I was out with my kids and came across a fresh kill in the sagebrush. This kill was torn into pieces, shredded like cheese. So, either there are some sort of wolf-like creatures walking around, or maybe there's truth to these skinwalker shapeshifter beings out here in the desert. One thing is for sure, you have to be careful out here. It can get very dangerous, and if you are not prepared, well, prepare for bad things to happen. Before I end this email, I'll tell you about one quick encounter I remember one of my family members telling me about, at least that they thought there was a large coyote walking around their house at night. One night, my family member was actually out on her porch and said that the coyote thing was following her and their small dogs. She got scared, ran into the house, and so after wandering around some more, this thing, what she thought was an upright coyote, just ups and leaves. One of our other relatives had hunted in New Mexico for coyotes before, and he came and visited with her and said he was very familiar with this kind of evil spirit, and told her he could sense its presence all around her trailer and all over the land they lived on, that this being had purposefully left its mark there to let others know not to come here. Really scary stuff, honestly. When I was 16 years old, I was living in a small town called Mountain View, Arkansas, in a small house that my mother and I had rented. I was up late one night and I was all alone. I was going to bed and I heard a noise coming from the backyard. I went to check it out and saw this black figure walking towards the house from the woodline. It appeared to be about 7 feet tall with a long, curved beak face and large, glowing yellow eyes. It had bat-like wings on the back and large talon-like claws. Terrified, I ran back inside, locking the door. I wish I would have had a camera or cell phone to take a picture, but it was like 2004, so I didn't have a cell phone yet. I'm not sure what it was, a demon or a bat creature or what. I think it maybe might have been a demon, maybe a gargoyle, but I'm not sure. This wouldn't be the first time, though, that something strange and I had run in together. I have had many paranormal experiences. The two that stand out the most are just before this sighting occurred. I was still 16 years old at the time, and I was home alone, and I was asleep. I woke up to see a black silhouette figure standing over me. But this figure wasn't an average-sized man. It was about 7 to 8 feet tall and had only what I can describe to you as burning red eyes that were filled with hate and malice, like it wanted to torment me and hurt me physically in any way it could. It was just radiating this aura off of it. You know how you can get a sense for good and bad people? Well, this thing was just giving off a really bad aura. And I tried screaming, but my body would not let me. I was paralyzed and I tried moving, but I could not. I was so scared. The figure just stared at me, and then it disappeared. I wasn't able to move for another few minutes, and when I could, I was terrified and freaked out. I did not even feel my legs. I felt like I was going to pee my pants. I just wanted to curl up in a ball and cry, but I could not. I was too scared to even do that. Eventually, I fell asleep, but couldn't wait to tell my mom about what had happened. She believed me, thankfully. I guess, come to find out, that she had a heaping helping of crazy things happen to her too, while she was in the same house. From seeing spirits, to seeing what she described to me as little imp-like creatures that tried to torture her early in the morning by prodding her with what she tells me is sharp objects. She never specified what she meant by that. I was young, so I didn't know what to do. I started praying that night, and the next day, I went to the library and really started reading the Bible. I read it and began to pray a little more. I still prayed and read the Bible like every day for a while, and it definitely seemed to help. I don't want to say I was religious or anything, but I had an understanding of the spirituality of it. I mean, I did have a lot of experiences with spirits and angels from my dreams and meditations. I definitely wasn't as scared as I was before, but I knew that something just wasn't right. I began practicing yoga and meditation shortly thereafter, and that felt like it was helping. Encounters at that point seemed to really come to a slowdown, and same with my mother. This was all shortly before we saw this physical entity, what I would describe as a gargoyle-like bat creature, and it had a beak and these nasty, hideous features. So maybe not that. Part of me believes it was the evil of this house that was allowed to manifest into a physical form to come after me, because I had been doing something right by praying, and I guess it did not like that. Then, fast forward more. After my sighting of this thing and how terrifying it was, I find out my mom had been seeing what she tells me are goblins. They're these hideous little creatures, maybe 2 to 3 feet tall, the size of a toddler, walking around her room at night. She'll wake up to them holding her down, trying to have their way with her, biting her, telling her they're going to kill her. Just really horrible stuff. Anyway, we put up with this stuff for about another year, off and on before we finally ended up moving. I remember because it was right at my senior year of high school when we moved out of that house. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. I've always believed that there is good and evil in the world, and I don't believe the devil is always going to be the one to come out the winner. I think God and the angels or the spirit realm are much, much stronger, and I believe if you have enough faith and you're open to the experience, then you can definitely see the other side. I don't think it's something that happens all the time, but I think you can experience it if you want to put the effort in. Now, I don't want to give out the details of the place we moved afterwards because I'm unsure of the location to be exact, but I'll just say this: it was much closer to town. Hi, what lurks beneath. I know this isn't a normal story email that you're so accustomed to getting, but I found this article and I think you can appreciate it. I'm sure if you read it, your viewers can too. Here it is. Encounters with Dogman have been reported for years around the world, but in Scandinavia, they've been chronicled for as long as documented records have been kept. Jens Lekman has studied the Dogman, performing a statistical assessment on newspaper and folklore archives to identify areas where they have been seen. He also looked at ecosystems and demographics in a study intended to prove or falsify the Dogman. By diachronic measurements, sightings have occurred mostly in the fall, with numbers peaking in October. The most frequently reported times are around 4 p.m. to 4 a.m. The size of the creatures, according to Lekman, range from 2 to 3 meters, and they are less commonly sighted near water. One distinguishing characteristic that makes the Dogman stand out from a common dog is a prolonged tail, facial features such as pointed ears, and the defining factor of a creature being half man and half dog. However, a lot of it is also behavior. Local lore liken the creature to attack on livestock, horses, cows, and sheep. The local river may have been polluted because of large amounts of blood in the water by locals at one point hundreds of years ago. But the watershed for that river shows a large amount of white-tailed deer activity, giving the Dogman ample food opportunities. The animal most likely to attack livestock would be a stray wolf. Are wolves responsible for these sightings? They are territorial animals. Human activity gives them an even greater sense of urgency. Lekman suggests that human encroachment is of importance when evaluating the behavior of these creatures. And he says this: I ruled out the idea of the Dogman is a dog-wolf hybrid. I found it quite odd that these things occurring in the northernmost areas of Sweden, such as dogs being found decapitated. Several hunters reported not seeing deer, even in their designated hunting areas. Other reports of strange footprints in snow have been dismissed as bear trails, even when tracks don't belong to any Russian or polar bear found in Sweden. Lekman suggests that, in some instances, the creature may be more human-like, but he cannot narrow down a specific description. Many creatures described by eyewitness reports could be considered humanoid bipedal animals, which occur quite often throughout history and have even been associated with the paranormal. At least one other researcher suggests it may be more of a problem with misidentification than something paranormal. Cryptozoologist Johan Randwall contested Lekman's claim that these creatures could not be a dog and wolf crossbreed. It's known that animals can become fixed in certain inbred or regionalized structures, like many domestic dogs, but the facts still prove that crossbreeds are not a common thing, and not only must be two species. Coyotes and dogs look more like Dogman than, for instance, a bottlenose dolphin. Considering that forming hybrid species is thousands or even millions of years old, to place a doubt over a well-insured claim doesn't hold much water. Perhaps this serves as a warning if you request people moving to rural areas to not further overpopulate the landscape. Regardless, whether these are really Dogmen or not something is occurring in the region for people to be so interested in. I was crossing railroad tracks when I looked up, and I caught my first glimpse ever of a cryptid. It was a wolf, peering through trees on my left. I briefly caught my second visual, this time straight on, of the same creature crouched, looking at me. There was a sudden blur of motion, and this wolf was running toward me. I hardly had enough time to think, and so I ran to my left. I turned around just in time to see this thing running toward me. And this thing was pursuing me hot on two legs, the same way an Olympic runner would run directly at you. Unrelenting, I held my breath and dove into a small pond that was right near me, hoping that this would deter this thing from chasing me. I know it sounds strange, but when you're in fight or flight mode, you do some questionable things. This thing stops and hesitates, unsure of what to do next. I stayed below the surface of the pond, trying my best to hold my breath and to not surface. All I could see was the faint outline of this thing just standing there, waiting for me to surface. The thought of what was chasing me 2 seconds ago Then not doing anything made me really question my reality. I waited for almost 2 minutes before I felt my lungs about to burst, and as I came to the surface, this thing was now completely out of sight. After looking around, I couldn't see it, but man oh man, I could feel it. I just felt this heavy presence, this lingering feeling looming in the area, and I knew it had to be close by. I knew if I did not act now, I was getting out of here alive. So, I quickly pulled myself to shore and made a break for it. Immediately, I hear this thing bursting out of the bushes and starts pursuing me yet again. I'm really not sure, looking back, why a mere pond and me being submerged in water, with it having anything to do with it stopping to chase me. Maybe it knew I was hiding, so it too took the chance to also hide and wait for me. What I can tell you is patience is virtue. I must have been a thorn in its proverbial side. Something made this thing tire of me quickly, because it gave up on me as a meal and left. I gave myself a fair distance of space and waited for what seemed to be the right moment to give my legs enough freedom to start running again. I was still tucked in behind a few trees, just trying to catch my breath. It was then that I heard that sound of these wolves' claws pushing against the soil, the thudding of their legs coming towards me. It was coming back again. I knew I could not wait around. I could hear it coming back, unsure of what to do exactly. I peeked out behind a large tree in concealment as this thing was sprinting towards me again, knocking a massive tree down as it went. All I could think of was if it gets any closer, I'm a goner. No one to stand witness but me and the animal's next meal. This thing didn't stop. It was fixated on bringing harm to me and killing me. As it furled down to make another leap, all I could think of was, God, please let it fall. Leave me be. Those prayers must have been answered, as this blur's body fell into a softer, overgrown area behind me, in the earth. I turned around to see this creature falling down into this small pit, covered in mulch and pine and tree limbs. Immediately, I began retreating back the way I came. I picked up my pace and did not stop running until I was safely in my car. I could hear this thing screaming and howling the entire way, pissed that it had lost me. Whatever it was some unknown creature with an ape-like body shape, connected to the deaths of two people affiliated with the same people connected with the first death of a professor and a student. Someone took pictures of film associated with the deaths. I knew my friend who was working with them back in the woods in 1964. There's something going on, and it's important for somebody to finally find out and really expose what's going on here. I am of high moral standard, and personally, with a deep understanding of this spiritual world. Too much to explain here in a small email, so I'll cut to the chase. This is my eyewitness encounter of this hominid creature. May 6th, 2017. I was finishing my loop around as I was walking home from the market, where I had just finished doing errands. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement in a nearby tree. Upon looking, there was my first great sighting. This humanoid monkey-like creature swung down between the branches, as if weightless, and then dropped down very quickly, disappearing behind the tree. The creature crouched at first and was swaying side to side, all while staring at me. It appeared weightless, like I said. Once I saw it smoothly sit on the limb, it immediately leapt away and vanished. The drop was fascinating and quick. I don't know if it was followed or chased by something bigger, but I assume it was not alone. There was no repeated sighting, and no real noise accompanied this sighting, so I'm not sure. Another interesting thing too was I could see, at least I thought, was another figure at my peripheral on my left as I was walking too. Once I look over though, it was always gone. I'm not sure how to describe such a strange creature. However, I do know for me personally, it is something I will never forget. I only saw it for a brief moment, and have even questioned myself, but it happened. This was my second encounter up to this point, as a few weeks ago, I experienced something brush past my legs in my sleep, and I felt its physical presence bruise me while in a deep trance-like state. I believe the reoccurring sightings I have of the same type of being or beings is of high spiritual importance. Having this encounter, I have since relocated to Mesa, Arizona back in February, and I'm keeping my eye out for what may be more of these things. I was out camping one evening by a large lake, all by myself. The night was beautiful, and it was a serene, quiet evening. All of a sudden, I felt this breeze of extremely cold air, and a presence walking up beside me, but I saw nothing. As I feel the presence draw closer, I could hear the noise of heavy breathing. I assumed it was a bear, and I turned on my flashlight to look around. I didn't see anything, but I could feel something. I could hear breathing, but there was no signs of anything near me. Completely unnerved by this newfound sighting or experience, I sat up and decided it was time to retire to my tent. I quickly jumped in, afraid of what was going to happen. I stayed in my tent the rest of the night, clutching hold of my flashlight and a tiny pocket knife should anything happen. Attempting to calm myself, I distracted myself with thoughts of remembering camping as a child. Then, I heard two loud screeches just outside my tent. Then nothing. Shortly thereafter, I started hearing these loud noises approaching my tent in the night. They sounded large and whatever it was that I was hearing. I was panicking, thinking two really large men were going to come, invade, and kill me. The sounds would stop abruptly just outside my tent, then walk away and return at another angle. Several times this went on. I could hear 3 separate footsteps and sounds. The whole encounter lasted for several hours. It felt like an eternity. I thought I was going crazy. I just wanted it to stop. There were all sorts of other strange noises. Some of them were screams and growls, while the others were strange stomping noises. Then it would go silent for a moment, and I hear what sounded like a large branch being ripped off a tree right by me. Then, I hear it getting kicked off into the forest. Now, not only was I scared because of what I was experiencing, but I felt like whatever this was is trying to intimidate me and wanting to hurt me. Finally, it stopped, and I could not keep it together. I tried calling out for help, just hoping somebody else was around. But I heard nothing but me. I felt as though I was completely helpless and all alone. I knew I was doomed. This had been going on for hours now at this point, and these things were coming back and forth around my campsite. They were always circling my tent. It's like they were waiting for the right moment to strike. You could imagine I was on edge like crazy. And finally, the noises eventually ceased for a period of time. I wasn't sure what was going to happen. They could still be out there watching me, but I was not going to take any chances or risks. I figured that staying put in my tent was the best course of action, at least until sunrise. I waited out the entire night in my tent, completely frozen in fear. Morning eventually came, and I had not slept at all. Thoroughly exhausted, I decided to hike my way out as soon as I could. Upon exiting my tent, the area around me was trashed. Huge branches were ripped off the large fir tree, about 10 feet away from my tent. My supplies were thrown all over the campsite. Frightened but intrigued, I grabbed my stuff, hit the trail looking for a clear spot where I could escape, because I couldn't exactly remember the section of trail that I had hiked in. I only had the backpack that was salvageable, and of course my tent. Everything else outside was destroyed. Upon getting to my car more than just a mile away, I opened my trunk, put my gear inside. At the time, I had no idea what had happened the night before, but as I'm closing my trunk, getting ready to enter my car, I heard this horrific scream off in the distance. It sounded like a man's yell, but really deep and really loud. Like whatever made it had a huge set of lungs. I froze in place, listening for a few seconds. Then, out of nowhere, these strange noises start sounding off all around me. I felt immediate danger, and just like the night before, I realized if I didn't get in my car at that very moment, my life would be in danger. Terrified, I jumped in my car, locked all the doors, and left as fast as I could. Still hearing these noises echoing off in the distance. What did I hear the previous night? What did all of this mean? All I can say is that this experience left me completely overcome with fear, confusion, and amazement. I've never had an experience like that before. I still feel shaken about how such a large creature could move about at night, surround a tent like it did, and scare somebody, yet without ever being seen. There are theories and explanations for what it could have been, but I really have my doubts about most of them. I just don't think everybody has come up yet with a plausible answer. You have to be aware that how loud these were, intimidating and ferocious these things were. Whatever it was, I'm certain it's not a bear. Is it possible I encountered a Bigfoot? I was working a late-night shift at a meat processing plant. My coworker and friend Sean and I were smoking a cigarette outside on break and just chatting away by our car when we hear something off in the trees right beside the parking lot. It naturally distracts us, and we both turn our attention to what we just heard. I mean, it was pretty loud. All we could make out afterwards was a rustling of something big moving and some very faint breathing sounds, like somebody who smoked a pack a day their entire life. Incredibly raspy. We both gave each other glances of puzzlement, figuring somebody was just maybe messing with us, or maybe it was a homeless person. It was very weird. I mean, nobody could get in there. There's industrial barbed wire fencing, and beyond the fencing was trees. The surrounding area was just thick woods that connected to a national forest, I believe. So, after glancing for maybe 5 or so more seconds, we're both just like, huh, and we go back to chit-chatting. Then the next thing you know, we hear this loud crunch of a tree branch, followed by even more rapid deep breathing. We turn our attention again, and this time, we glance towards the side of the trees and we see a thing. I say thing because I don't know what it was, but it was hunched over and then stood up to its full height. Sean and I both saw it, and Sean was so shocked he drops his cigarette. This thing was a large hairy creature, and might I add how ugly it was. It also appeared to have a snout, and had deep set-in eyes. This thing was well over 6 feet tall, maybe no more than 8 or 9 feet. It was pretty tall. It had kind of grayish-black fur, and the more we saw its face, the more hideous it was. To better explain what it looked like, imagine orangutan, or Alf, if you remember Alf. It was like a monkey crossed with a wolf. It was just ugly. It had some more human-like traits, while others were more canine-like. I remember 2 large rows of pointed teeth. It too had a very wide snout. I guess think like Alf, but add some canine features to it, and make it a little bit more scary looking. It slowly bent down, looked up at us, and stood up right away against the fencing, staring at us. It just glared, and after a couple more moments, it turned away and went back into the trees. I looked at Sean, and he looked at me. He was terrified, and we used this as an opportunity to run back inside and end our break. We told our boss and other coworkers nothing. We finished out our shifts terrified out of our minds that we saw this thing. After work, Sean and I would only talk about it briefly, that we never saw anything like it before, and nobody would ever believe us, even if we did tell somebody. We talked to each other once in a while about it, but not really. I mean, we generally don't mention what we saw, and especially to anybody else. We do still hang out on break and talk about things like we normally did, but not like this. I don't think we'll ever be as comfortable as we were. The sighting has kind of changed us. I'm really not sure what we saw that evening. Maybe you could help me out. My daughter, 12 years old at the time, had stayed overnight with me, and we had fallen asleep on the living room couch. We awoke around 7:15 a.m. to see this entity standing by the window. The first thing I noticed immediately was hair hanging down over its face and down the back of its head and neck. It was weird looking. It was covered in nasty matted hair and looked like an ugly dog. It was staring at us. I felt like I was paralyzed and could not get up off the couch. I was petrified, to say the least. We had a staring competition for what seemed like forever, and I finally was able to scream. And just before it turned and walked away, my daughter had awakened and seen this thing too. She immediately became hysterical. She runs up to me and collapses on me crying. I phoned the police after it walked away, but they told me there was really nothing they can do about it. Well, a couple of nights later, and we had completely forgotten all about the whole thing. My daughter's father had come pick her up for the weekend, and as he's getting her into his truck, I hear him start yelling, just as I got back in the house. I go back outside and I see this thing. The same thing we saw last night approaching my now ex-husband and daughter. I froze again and could not get my body into gear. I was so terrified I couldn't even move. My ex-husband pulls out his pistol and fires at it, hitting it in the chest. But the thing never flinched. It just kept coming. Eventually, it turned and began to walk off. He shot at it again in the back, but again, it didn't even flinch. It just walked off, up and over up a hill. It never even stopped. The man always keeps a firearm on him, and I'm glad he did because who knows what this thing would have done had he not had a weapon. What I can't believe is that he shot it, and this thing didn't even react. It was just evil. So he's flipping out, asking me if I saw that, and I start to tell him about how we just saw it at the window the other night. I asked him to follow me up into the house so I could show him what the situation and where I was when we had seen it. I showed him, and we exited the house, and he goes around and looks, and you could see, which I didn't see, but there were impressions in the ground where this thing had been clearly standing. He seemed quite shocked, but at the same time, he seemed like he knew what he'd been seeing that night. There wasn't any feet prints, but you could just see something big and heavy had been standing here, right in front of our window. I shudder at the thought that this thing could have been there for a while, watching us sleep before we even awoke to see it. For the next 4 to 5 months, we had weird sensations all around the house and property, feeling like we're either not alone or being watched. But to us, we never did see that thing again after that. My ex-husband, after that, always brought around his .44 with him. At that point, every time he came to pick up and drop off our daughter, never did have an experience like that again for the remainder of the time that I lived in that house. This was in May of 1985, and I moved out of that house shortly after, Thanksgiving of the same year. Lately, all of the animals in our neighborhood have started to act strangely. We can attribute these behaviors to none other than supernatural forces. At random times, all of our animals will begin to act strangely, barking, hissing, and acting crazy at the woods surrounding our houses. Our cats recently have gone missing, and so have our small dogs, while some of us believe that it's a pack of coyotes or something on the loose. I know better. Whatever is there has taken an interest in our pets for reasons still unknown. If this is in fact paranormal, entering an aggressive, directly territorial combat response is illogical, as in nature. Defense-based aggression is rarely the first response. Based on the research, I believe that this is a being that is purposefully waiting for just the right moments to strike. They know, or it knows, how we behave, yet we do not know its behaviors. It's extremely patient, cunning, and intelligent. It's not a coyote, fox, or wolf. I've seen the wanderings of coyotes, and there appears to be a kind of intelligent guiding in their behavior. Based on emotional interference and drawing from memory, coyotes, even in packs, seem apprehensive when coming into certain territories of neighborhoods due to large populations. We live in areas with a lot of wildlife and birds anyway, so it's very natural to assume that coyote behavior is simple fear of human beings. These cats, though, that are being snatched away and small dogs, aren't animals straying far away from populated areas in the neighborhood. They're being snatched up from the yards or back porch. Something is taking them, and nobody is sure what it is. From other experiences alone in the woods, we know it's not your typical animal in nature. This has to be the work of something else entirely. What? I'm not quite sure. Is it possible that this is a Dogman or Bigfoot? Absolutely, since they are usually the ones to be a little bit more aggressive when it's coming in for food and based on stories and other experiences. But at what scale do we really call this a Dogman or Squatch? How many animals have to disappear? This has to be something else that we are not experiencing or understanding. What is creepy is that this is going on mostly at night, when everybody's asleep, in the early morning hours. That's when these animals are disappearing and nobody is finding a single trace of them. My girlfriend, in fact, asked me one night if I saw movement out in the yard, but I didn't see what she was talking about. She shot up out of bed to look and said she could have sworn she saw a big shadow moving around quickly between yards. But I dismissed her outright. And it's really got me thinking. Maybe there is truth to what she had to say. So far, nobody has found a trace of any animals, no blood trails, no clues, and never any bones. I do think we will find the remains at some point, but who knows? I honestly have no idea.